Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. It's a pleasure to welcome you back for this webinar on governance and business models for setting up a living lab. This is the second event in the webinar series on the soil mission and living lab concepts and methodologies. And today's event is organized and hosted again by the Nishuns Project. So let's start today by introducing your speakers for today, who you'll be hearing from. I'll start with myself. My name is Isabelle Couture. I am a senior project manager at the European Network of Living Labs, and I am joined by my colleague, Delinda Cavallo, a junior project manager also at ENOL. So maybe just a quick hello, Delinda.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you. So for those of you who might not yet be familiar with the work of the European Network of Living Labs, ENOL is the European Network of Certified Living Labs that has been funded in 2006 under the EU presidency of Finland. And in spite of its name, ENOL has grown from a Europe focus to an international growing community with more than 160 active members across 5 continents and 35 countries. And since its creation in 2006, ENOL facilitates knowledge exchange, joint action, and project partnership among its members. And the goal of ENOL is to promote the living lab concept, influence policies, enhance living labs, and enable their implementation at a global level. And in this line, we offer different services. Among these, we have the certification and labeling program, since ENOL is the only institutional body entitled to assess the maturity of living labs. We also offer a capacity building program around living lab creation and increasing expertise on living lab methodologies and tools. And we have working groups involved in different areas of key interest, including agriculture, agri-food, and rural issues. And I'll briefly mention that ENOL is involved and provides its expertise in several soil-related projects, including the already Prep Soil and, of course, Nishuns projects. And we're very excited to be kicking off a new project in January as well that aims to establish and run a one-stop shop structure to coordinate, support, enlarge, and promote the network of 100 soil health living labs and lighthouses that will be funded under the soil mission and ensuring their lead of the transition towards healthy soils. So very excited about this one coming up in January. So today I am joined by my colleagues Vladislava and Isidora from BioSense. So I will turn it over to them to introduce BioSense Institute.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I'm Vladislava Grbovic from the BioSense Institute, Novi Sad, Serbia. BioSense is a research and development institute for IT in biosystems and University of Novi Sad member. BioSense is a public institute with more than 140 permanent staff and 60 part-time staff, and it is a dynamic, multidisciplinary international organizations with engineers, material scientists, biologists, agronomists, and so on. Also, BioSense is a pioneer in the digital transformation of agriculture in Serbia, founded in 2015, exploring scientific and technological frontiers regarding the application of IT in agriculture. The BioSense Institute strives to deliver state-of-the-art digital solutions to the farming sector in Serbia and, of course, to the world, in order to ensure higher yields and smaller investments. BioSense participates in over the 100 national and more than 50 Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects. The Institute is founded and hosts one of the first European living lab focused on the precision agriculture, pay for all, and open innovation ecosystem that promotes the development of user-driven precision agriculture. And my colleague Isidora, she will be sharing our experience with you later on. And now back to you, Isabel, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so today we're happy to offer a webinar that combines Enol's wealth of expertise in the Living Lab methodology with Biosense's tangible examples as a certified living lab, which will help you ground the concepts and methodologies that we're presenting today in real life. So we again have a full agenda for you today where we will cover several topics, including again, a brief overview of the soil mission. We will discuss what are stakeholders so that you have a good understanding before we go deeper into the concepts. We'll cover, of course, governance models and business models. So what are they? What is the definition? What are the benefits? What do you gain from having them? We'll also discuss the business model canvas for both, and we will at the end also cover the many support to applicants activities offered through Nishuns. And a few housekeeping items before we get this event underway. So please be aware that we have a Q&A box. So you should find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to submit your questions through there. There is also the chat box if you want to communicate with other attendees. We highly recommend that you rename yourself to include your full name and organization name so that it's clear where you're joining from, and you're welcome to introduce yourselves and share information in the chat box. Of course, if you have given your consent during registration to receive updates from Nishuns and or to receive information from other initiatives related to the soil mission, you have the right to withdraw your consent always, and you can do so by emailing info@nishuns.eu. And as always, this event is recorded so that we can share it publicly after the fact so that others can also benefit from the content. And finally, a very brief disclaimer here pertaining to the licensing of this webinar. And now I turn it over to my colleague, Delinda, please.
Okay, so let's continue with the webinar and let us briefly introduce to the EU mission, A Soil Deal for Europe, since not all of you may be familiar with it. For more detailed information, we recommend you watch the recording from the previous national engagement events that you can find on the Nishun website. Healthy soil are essential for all life-sustaining processes on Earth. They give us fuel, fiber, and food, and they provide essential ecosystem services like clean water and habitats for biodiversity. They also help slow down climate change and make us more resilient to extreme climate events by giving us major carbon reserves. Soil support us and they connect us, all of us. Yet, healthy soil are often taken for granted. Soil health is threatened globally because of a range of human activities, such as competition of land, intensive land use, urbanization, and climate change. In Europe alone, about 2/3 of the soil are considered unhealthy, and the cost associated with soil degradation in EU exceeds 50 billion euro per year. Soil is fragile, not renewable resource that needs to be carefully managed and kept safe for future generations. Recognizing the importance of soils and the pressure soil functions are facing, the EU made soil the focus of one of its 5 EU missions, which are new ways to bring concrete solutions to great challenges. The soil mission was created to lead the transition towards healthy soil by 2030, and it is at the heart of the EU Green Deal, a package of policy initiatives to overcome threats by climate change and environmental degradation. The soil includes 8 specific soil health objectives, which I believe you will be now familiar with. But very quickly, the objectives are reduce desertification, conserve and increase soil organic carbon stocks, stop soil sealing and increase reuse of urban soil, reduce soil pollution and enhance restoration, prevent erosion, improve soil structure to enhance soil biodiversity, reduce the EU global footprint on soil, and improve soil literacy in society. Before we dive into the concept of today's webinars, we provide a reminder here of the definitions of soil health, living labs, and lighthouses. To learn more about these topics, you can also watch the recording of the first webinar that is now available on the Neshu's website. So soil health living labs are collaborative initiatives to co-create knowledge and innovation. The EU Soil Mission Implementation Plan defines soil health living labs as user-centered, place-based and transdisciplinary research and innovation ecosystems, which involve land managers, scientists, and other relevant partners in systemic research and co-design, testing, monitoring, and evaluation of solutions in real-life settings to improve their effectiveness for soil health and accelerate adoption. Meanwhile, lighthouses are defined as places for demonstration of solutions, training, and communication that are exemplary in their performances in terms of soil health improvement. They are local sites, like one farm, one forest exploitation, one industrial site, one urban city green area, and others. So now we will give the word to Isabel for the next section of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Alinda, for the review of the EU Soil Mission. Okay, so before going into the governance and business models concepts, it is really important to better understand first what we mean by stakeholders and how to engage them, which we'll cover in this next section. So as seen in webinar 1, the multi-stakeholder participation and active user involvement are essential building blocks of setting up your living labs. Multi-stakeholder participation is, as a reminder, taking a holistic view on society involving stakeholders from the quadruple helix model. So again, from all sectors, government, academia, private sector, and from the civil society, including users. And active involvement refers to how a living lab involves relevant stakeholders actively in all relevant activities, ensuring their feedback is captured and implemented throughout the whole life cycle of the innovation. So just as a quick recap on the other essential building blocks of living labs defined by ENOL, they are co-creation, so where values are bottom-up co-created, not only for, but also by all relevant stakeholders. We have the real life setting, so where a living lab operates in the real life of the end users. We have the multi-method approach, where each living lab activity is problem-driven and the methodological approach towards every activity is selected based on the expected outcomes of the activity and the stakeholders who need to be involved. And finally, orchestration, where the living lab operates as the orchestrator within the ecosystem to connect and partner up with relevant stakeholders. And again, see webinar 1 for more detail on these concepts. But you will also remember that the engagement of a variety of stakeholders from the quadruple helix is also one of the criteria for the selection and setup of living labs in the context of the soil mission. So very important to have the representation from the various areas. So yes, quadruple helix right here. Okay, and so let's go to the basics. What are stakeholders? So the most common definition of stakeholders defines them as individuals or organizations who are involved or interested in a particular living lab or project. But it's usually forgotten that they are also the ones affected by the way the living lab or project is operating or by what is being created. The input of stakeholders has a direct impact on how the living lab moves forward, and that's why you need to engage them from the very beginning. And as mentioned previously, stakeholders should come from all sectors of society represented in the quadruple helix, which we have here on the screen. The specific actors will always change depending on the focus, objective, and context of your living lab, but all the actors can be classified in 4 categories, which are, again, academia, which can be, for example, universities or research and development centers. We have the public sector, which can be government and regional development agencies, policymakers, but also the public sector in general. We have industry, which can consist of businesses of all sizes, so small, medium, large, and business clusters and associations, but also farmers. And the fourth sector, yes, of the quadruple helix is the citizen and civil society, including all end users, such as land managers, consumers, and their associations. And of course, farmers, for example, can also fall under this category. And these together form what we call the public-private people partnership. So the PPP that enables real co-creation and impact. And as we will see, it is absolutely crucial to involve stakeholders from all 4 sectors in the governance of the living lab. And keep in mind that the specific stakeholders may be different from one level to the next. So for example, a specific representative from, say, government or a landowner association or a specific farmer might be involved in your living lab governance, but the same organization may not be involved in a project, or perhaps even a different representative from that same organization may be involved in your project. So there is differences between the different levels, and organizations may or may not be involved at different levels. Okay, and it's of course also important to consider the stakeholders that are specific to the land use or land uses that your work focuses on. And here you have some of the different key players that might be involved, again, in each of the 4 types of soil health living labs. I'm just mentioning this here because as we know, your particular living lab might focus on more than one land use. So it might be more cross-cutting. And in that case, you might need to actually involve players from these different boxes. So you might need to mix and match a little bit the stakeholders depending on your needs and the context and objectives of your living lab. And now that you better understand what we mean by stakeholders and know who to involve, let's now take a deeper dive into business and governance models, which are, again, crucial criteria for the setting up of living labs, the long-term setup of your living labs under the Soil Mission Implementation Plan. So creating a viable governance model that will, so let's, I guess, in terms of the governance models of Living Lab, let's take a look first at what is a governance model. So within a Living Lab approach, the governance describes the way that a Living Lab research or activity at the strategic or operational level is managed and organized. In the governance model of a living lab, we look for the stakeholders, again, of the quadruple helix. We'll repeat that a whole lot. We look for the stakeholders of the quadruple helix who provide a direct contribution into the living lab activities. And as mentioned, yes, all sectors must be represented in a governance model, and all involved should be provided with decision-making opportunities. Getting a representative from each stakeholder group on board right from the start will help you create a governance structure and find the right legal framework when the living lab is fully developed. And the model should resemble a circle of mediators where there's no single voice or no single voice dominates the conversation. And in this setup, all stakeholders act as providers into your living lab. So the stakeholders from all sectors of the quadruple helix, again, academia, government, public sector, and the civil society, including end users and industry, can contribute directly to your governance model in various ways. And here we show some of them. So it can be contributions in the form of finances, money, or in-kind contributions. It could be also organizational contributions or contributions into the decision-making process. So there are many ways in which your stakeholders can directly contribute in your governance model. And here, the governance model of your living labs will have a crucial impact, not only on your flexibility and the effectiveness of your living lab, but also on your long-term sustainability and capacity to remain active. So living labs absolutely need to have a governance model to ensure the sustainability and viability of the living lab, to gain insights into new ways of managing or handling societal challenges, to communicate effectively, to avoid failure of your living lab, to act in accordance with ethics, integrity, and a responsible code of conduct. And finally, to have a starting point that can indicate how an organization needs to improve. And actually, through the webinar registration form, one of you asked if there are any formal or legal steps in establishing a living lab. So of course, it can depend on your living lab, but we always recommend to have a governance model to ensure the long-term sustainability and to reduce the risks of internal disputes. And as the slide here covers some examples of different legal forms that the organization hosting the living lab can take. So for example, a host organization can be a private company. It can be a research center department. It can be a cluster or a group around a public, regional, or city structure. It can also be a mutuality or a mutualistic organization, and it can be a not-for-profit organization, which can include associations, cooperatives, or foundations. There are many ways, many legal forms that the host organization of your living lab can take. And here we present the various steps of setting up a governance model for a living lab. So first, identifying the right stakeholders for your governance, taking into account the need for representation, again, of the quadruple helix, and paying attention to actually which competencies you are needing within your governance. And here you will identify the central stakeholders contributing to the living lab activities, as well as give them, the stakeholders, specific roles at the strategic, but also operational levels. In the next step, you consider who is paying or contributing into the living lab. So how will the activities be financed? Will there be a cash or in-kind contributions? And of course, we'll cover that again in the business model section of today's webinar. But in the next phase, you will define how decisions will be taken within your living lab and how the supporting structures should be designed. So for example, what starts a living lab process? Who handles it? Who is responsible for engaging with stakeholders? Who can write and sign contracts? So you want to go in a fair amount of detail. And you would also think through the decision-making process at the various levels, including the project strategy, the project implementation, and the day-to-day decisions. In the second to last step presented here, you will develop the communication strategies, both internally and externally. And finally, in the last step, you identify what each participant gets. So do they get money or social impact, prototypes or products, services, intellectual property, etc. So you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of who gets what within your governance model. And in addition to these steps, there are several more operational questions that you can consider when developing your governance model, and some of them are listed here. So for example, what is the legal entity of your host organization? Who owns it? Who is responsible for it? Again, who makes decisions of go or no go? Who is working at the Living Lab? Where does it reside within the organization? Which competencies are needed? What is a long-term goal of the Living Lab? And who takes care of the results from a Living Lab process? So we know that since it's a lot of information and things to consider, so to better assist you with navigating these steps and developing your business model, we provide you here with a business model canvas, which is adapted from Enol's virtual Living Lab, a model designed by Enol member Fernando Villarino from Library Living Lab. And the canvas was created to assist the Living Lab in determining the most suitable governance model for your specific work requirements. And here you will recognize already some of the many actually of the steps that we've already discussed, but we'll go through it together in more detail. Okay, so first at the very top, you will see that it's asking you to identify a shared motto for your Living Lab. So which is a short sentence or expression that describes your guiding principle. So it's something that will help you express what's important to your Living Lab and how you want to operate. And it can serve as a landing place for your stakeholders. In a second step, actually, so going down a little bit, you again identify what stakeholders are to be represented, again, always pulling from each sector of the quadruple helix. So public sector, academia, industry, and civil society, so users, citizens, etc. And then you identify, going back up, you identify the needs and opportunities for each of the stakeholders groups. What are the priorities and expected outcomes? And they will be different depending on the sector. So for example, a government department's expected results could be reducing CO2 emissions or looking for ways to help farmers in diversifying their agricultural policies. A university's needs could focus on filling specific research gaps or collecting particular data sets. A company could be looking at transforming business practices into more sustainable forms or identifying new buyers for products. And finally, the civil society representatives could expect the improvement of soil health and crop yields. So some examples of what might be some of the expected results based on the specific needs of the different sectors. And the final item in this section is around who pays and contributes in what way. So again, with finances, so money, or with in-kind contribution, whether it be materials or space or expertise, with representation or with personal contributions. In the next section, we now have how the decisions are being taken in your Living Lab. And we can define this at two levels, of course, at the strategic level and the operational level. When defining each level, we will look at the who and the modus operandi. The who should refer to not one or more organizations, but really to the specific people who will be responsible for making decisions. So you want to be as specific as possible. And the modus operandi refers to the particular way or method of taking the decisions. So would it be done through a steering committee? What will be you want to ask yourself, what will be the frequency of meetings? Will the decisions be made through voting by majority or by reaching consensus? So you really want to flesh out those details in this section. At the operational level, you again cover the day-to-day, and you cover who has responsibility for the daily activities and who makes decisions, and you define the who, specific people, and the modus operandi, how it's being done. And finally, you cover how the innovation process is communicated both internally and externally. So you agree on who will be involved and on a safe mechanism to exchange communication, developing, for example, your communication guidelines, etc. at this stage. And for every step of the way, you will develop documents setting up the who and mechanisms of your governance model. This will help you set clear guidelines and avoid conflict. So in a nutshell, this is the governance model canvas to help you through setting up the governance model within your Living Lab. And with that, and my voice going a little bit, I will now pass it over to Isidora for the next section of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Sorry for that. Okay, hi everyone. It is my pleasure to be today to present our journey as a Living Lab and maybe to answer to some of your questions on how we tackled the different problems. So thanks to my colleague Vladislava, she presented our institute a bit. But I will say that Biosense Institute is the host organization of a Living Lab called Pay for All, Precision Agriculture for All. This abbreviation also says what is our main topic, so precision agriculture. I will tell you a bit about our journey and our experience that each Living Lab has its own specific journey, and considering the environment in which it is found, it has different factors to consider. Therefore, since Biosense is a research and development institute, we started as a first public institute and as a Living Lab to be implemented through the research institute. Therefore, we already had much involvement with academia. And what we were actually looking for was experimental place, so somewhere where to validate and test our prototypes, our research outputs, and actually a place where we can actually expand what our research is about. That was our main goal in the beginning. Of course, there was this factor that we were the pioneers in the Living Lab concept, and not only in Serbia, but also in the region, and especially when it comes to precision agriculture. So as a Living Lab, we were the first one, which was also a benefit for us, but also a struggle. Since we were really learning from the start, we took time to develop our Living Lab, and that is something that I recommend to every newly established Living Lab, to take time to understand who are your main stakeholders, what are your main needs, and how to actually build a Living Lab from scratch, considering all the factors in the environment where the Living Lab is established. Therefore, considering that we were the pioneers, we also had the benefit to actually tailor the process for ourselves here in our region, in our ecosystem. Therefore, we needed to understand firstly who are our stakeholders. So as I said, our stakeholders, our main goal was to actually find experimentation and validation and testing by the stakeholders on the field of our technologies. Therefore, we understood that for us, out of the quadruple helix, the most important was the farmer and the industry. But also we strive to impose and to involve also the others from the quadruple helix, because a Living Lab is a meeting point of all of the different members of the quadruple helix. We cannot only include one, even though every Living Lab will have a, how can I say, maybe a difficult time to involve some of the stakeholders. For us, that was the governmental sector. And also it was like easy to involve some other ones, like the farmers for us, and the academia, since we are a research institute. I would say that we started by our governance model was including researchers and project managers. In the beginning, everyone was doing everything. So we had both involved in finding new projects, finding new financing methods, involving different stakeholders, and constant development and learning in the process. In the end, we divided a bit. So some of the members in the Living Lab took over the role of maybe finding new projects, financing, and maybe related to like the money part. And then we had other members in the Living Lab who focused more on the stakeholder relationship. So involving farmers, involving citizens, involving the governmental sector, etc. When it comes to the financing model, we understood in the beginning that for us, we have a really big opportunity getting finances from the European projects, of course, since we are a research institute who actually implements research on the field. But not only, we also had financial aid from the state, because we have a lot of PhD and university employees here at the institute. But also we found some industry actors that were helping us to commercialize maybe some of our prototypes on the market. This was a really difficult setting to make, but there were some companies that wanted to commercialize our product on the market, and therefore we were developing it. We actually patented, we protected it with the patent, and we let them commercialize this on the market. And our Living Lab was actually validating and testing the product on the farms. Then the stakeholder relationship, I would say, I will talk about it later, how we involved each of the members of the quadruple helix. I will divide it by detail, how each of the members were involved in the Living Lab. And finally, we, of course, joined in all from the start, and we expanded our topics, not only on precision agriculture, but we also evolved in how precision agriculture could be used in agroecology, climate change, and other aspects of how precision agriculture could be implemented in different sectors, not only in pure agricultural production. So thank you, and going further with the business model, I guess.
Thank you very much, Isidora. Wonderful. Okay, and I'll maybe plug in here that if you have any questions for Isidora, we will have plenty of time at the end to take questions. So we encourage you to, again, submit your questions through the Q&A box. And for our colleagues here at Biosense, if you have any questions for them. Okay, so again, thank you very much for the example. So let's now turn our attention to Living Lab business models. So starting with a definition of what a business model is. So as seen here, a business model is a set of decisions that define what will you offer, to whom and why, and how will you organize yourself in a financially viable manner. So there are various reasons why developing a business model is of benefit to your Living Lab. Some of them will be described here. So it fosters, of course, the sustainability and long-term viability of your Living Lab by helping you cope with the complexity of partnerships after the initial project financing has ended. So it helps set up that process. It supports value creation by analyzing, stimulating, and protecting the created value within the partnerships. It will help you verify that there is a market for your products or services and help you have a plan for the rollout to market. And finally, it sets you up for success, growth, and exploitation, building out the ecosystem and identifying new strategic lanes that you can take. And a business model will help you capture several elements, including the assumptions about user behavior and priorities. So as we've mentioned, the Living Lab setting widens the scope to include the full set of stakeholders from the quadruple helix. And users are no longer passive objects providing feedback. Instead, they become partners in co-creation. It will also capture the business model will capture the selection of target groups and value proposition, helping you define scope and differentiate your products and services. It also captures the value model. In a Living Lab setting, collaboration of stakeholders in the value network is necessary to capture value. And finally, it captures a configuration where partner resources and responsibilities are allocated among partners in the system. So here we present the various phases of setting up a business model. for a living lab. The first phase focuses on initialization and preparation. So here it's important to form partnerships that aim to expand the regional network and that are supported by a business plan. So this is really, again, essential for making sure that your living lab is sustainable in the long term. And it lays the groundwork by laying the groundwork in the initial phase, you are defining the conditions for future business growth and development. So you're setting it up for success. In this first phase or stage, you should also identify your living lab's value proposition and how it can be created so that you can achieve financial independence and attract revenues from a variety of sources. So as you may know, traditionally, companies have focused on creating value by selling products or services, or on doing better than their competitors by adjusting factors like the price or the quality of their products and services. But under a living lab, we shift this mindset and prioritize the experience of users, clients, and citizens to create value. We also consider the broader societal purpose as both a challenge and an opportunity in the value creation process. In the second phase of living lab operations, it is closely linked to offering innovation services that are centered, as always, around the needs and preferences of the users. And these services facilitate the development of new businesses. So living labs can establish relationships with other labs in the network to take advantage of the larger user communities or complementary innovation services and the benefits of economies of scale and scope. And in the final upscaling and commercialization phase, the living lab is embedded into the international innovation system. And it's at this stage that your strategies to capitalize on network effects really become mature. And again, to better assist you in the development of now your business model, we provide you here with a canvas. Which our NL member Juan Bertolin created. And this business model canvas is inspired by the more common business model canvas that you might have come across in the past. But this one is really special because it is adapted to the living lab context, and it includes the co-creation elements, which, as we know, are crucial building blocks of the living lab. So some of these sections are fairly self-explanatory, but let's go through it together. So in the problem section, you will, unsurprisingly, add information pertaining to why do you want to do a living lab? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And here you might want to try to identify 3 top problems you're wanting to solve. In the solutions, you, of course, want to add what are some of the potential or possible solutions to your problem. In the key activities, you add here, what do you want to do? What are the main activities to be carried out in the framework of the project? In the key resources, you add the main resources to carry out the project. So again, whether they are human or material, you want to add it all in this box. In the value proposition, and referring to what we've mentioned before, you will add what you will deliver, and you want to develop a clear and convincing message explaining why we should choose your living lab. What can you solve that maybe others can't? And what does your living lab bring to the table compared to other initiatives to implement projects based on co-creation and user-driven innovation? So what really makes your living lab special? And in the key metrics, very important, is where you will enter information about your main KPIs that will allow you to assess the evolution and impact of the project. And speaking of impact, in this box, you will want to add information about what influence you want your living lab to have. What are the desired social and environmental impact of the project results that you want to achieve? And now going in the right section of the canvas. So speaking of user segments, so who will be involved? Who will be the users who will participate in the co-creation of solutions? And the user engagement, of course, how are they going to participate, and how will you encourage users to participate in the projects? What are the incentives you might want to provide? In the customer segment, you will cover who is the target audience and identify end customers once the product has been tested. And in a key stakeholder, you identify entities, companies to support you, the sources of income, who will fund you, which will be also covered down below in the final bottom section here. So in your cost structure here, you want to add information pertaining to your budget, right? So how much will it cost to run your living lab? And you want to maybe add some details about the different line items of your budget. And in the revenue stream, you want to cover how are you going to support the expenses? How can you make your living lab sustainable? And as an example of funding stream, this could include revenue generation through your products and services. It could also include marketing a product or your service. It could be cooperation and investment from business angels, investors, venture capitalists. So definitely various ways to think through your funding streams at this stage. And it's important to remember that your business model will be a living document. It is by no means meant to be a static product that you just end up putting on the shelf and never looking at again. You actually want to revisit your business model on a regular basis to make sure you have the most updated information and you're still aligned with your goals and with the full process. So definitely something to keep in mind with this. And I saw already a question pertaining to the Canvas. We will be sharing these slides, so you will have access to this information after today's webinar. So you'll be able to grab it and adapt it to your needs as well. Okay, so with that, now I turn it back over to Isidora. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Let me just share my screen, please, in just a second. Okay, here it is. Let me minimize this. Okay, hi everyone. I don't know. Okay. Hi everyone. So once again, I promised to share a bit more in detail how our business model is and how we actually involved each of the participants in the quadruple helix in our institute. So I will start with academia, of course, because as I said, Biosense, which is the host organization of Pay for All, is a research institute. Therefore, we are directly involved with the University of our city, Novi Sad in Serbia. We are also directly involved with researchers in different areas, as Ladislava presented, and they're also part of our living lab, which makes us really close to the academia in this sector. And also, as I said, we develop digital technologies, different sensorings, which are experimented within our living lab. When I say sensoring, I'm talking about sensors for maybe for this when it comes to soil health, sensoring for the microbiological components in the soil. Then we have the purification of the water and sensoring the amount of pesticides in water, and those kind of digital technologies related directly to the agricultural sector. Therefore, our living lab is a place where we test these technologies, these sensors, using our participants from the quadruple helix farmers. Also, another example is our robot Lala, which you can see in the photo below, which actually does nitrogen analysis and quantification on the spot. So on the field, we actually visit our farmers and we actually use their fields in order to test these technologies and actually to show to them and to gather their feedback on how this robot can be improved and how this robot can maybe how we can add some new features to this prototype and additional information, maybe some if the quantification should be more accurate, more detailed, or if it lacks some information, etc. Different tools also, I would say the meta stations, which you can see in the photo, we also installed them in different fields here in Serbia, where people can use regular application developed by Biosense and just track the meteorological parameters on their field, precisely on their field. So it's really localized and it's really helpful to them. So the other part of the quadruple helix, the other group are, of course, the farmers and the industry. As I already mentioned, how we involve farmers. We actually bring the academia to the farmers, and these are the most important stakeholders for, I cannot say that there is the most important stakeholder, but of course, we are mostly involved with the farmers since we do experimentation on their fields. We also established a digital village, which is a village in the northern part of Serbia, where we actually gather a lot of different farmers. Because in the beginning, we saw that if we have one farmer there and another farmer there, it's good. It's good to cover all the geographical area, but it's better to actually involve a lot of different farmers in one spot, localized, because then they can share information, they can share insights on how our living lab works, on how our technology works, and they can actually talk between themselves, which is also one of the living lab methodologies to actually increase communication between the actors themselves. So we understood that this helps us a lot to localize our stakeholders. Also, I would say that we have, as I said before, commercial contact with the industry. This is the technology we developed, the plantometer, which actually detects the amount of chlorophyll and other components in the plant itself. And it is currently being commercialized on the market here in Serbia. And who knows in the future, maybe, but it is tested also on the farms from our ecosystem. Then speaking about the most difficult sectors for us to engage, which was definitely the governmental sector, since in Serbia, we don't have much contact with them in a sense that it's pretty a closed circle for us. But we found a way to actually involve them as well. So when it comes to the living lab concept, there is a bit need for imagination and for new ideas where you can actually, how you can overcome some troubles that you can find on the way to actually achieve your final goals. So when it comes to the governmental sector, we involve them by actually imposing the precision agriculture as a subject in high school education and both university education. So that's something that still doesn't exist in the educational system of Serbia. Therefore, we needed the governmental sector's approval, precisely the Ministry of Education, to actually create, for example, a new master program at the University of Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. At the State University, we needed their approval and their initiative and their recommendations on how a new master class only on precision agriculture could be inserted in the university. And from September, we'll have new students enrolled, which is actually what we are really proud of. And actually, precision agriculture is something that will be also taught at the University of Belgrade as a mandatory subject and as a course in the master studies of the University of Agriculture. And of course, talking about the last point, the citizens, I would say that since Serbia, it is the environment is like this, that we have a lot of IT experts and a lot of experts that are involved in the IT services, not only in agriculture, but also in gaming and different sectors. We actually gained a lot of visibility by combining these two industries. So the IT industry and agriculture as a really traditional sector of Serbia. So people are interested in what we do. People are really intrigued by how precision agriculture works. And we actually organize different sessions on different agricultural fairs. We are present in the media. We are present on social media and TV and radios. And we also organize open field events where we actually present our technologies and where everyone is invited, and also the citizens and the third parties that are interested can also join. So to sum up regarding this quadruple helix, I would say that a living lab is something that breeds on its own. It's a really specific concept that depends on different factors in your environment, but it definitely requires a lot of how can I say, work with different stakeholders and different ideas, which also brings the charm in the living lab concept itself. So thank you, and hopefully I will be answering your questions afterwards. Going back to Vladislava.
Thank you, Isidora. Now I will be sharing my screen. Just a second. Okay. Really quick. Okay. So this is the slide. I want to show you from our colleagues from Slovenia. They wanted to participate in this webinar, and that's very nice of them. And our colleague Lara helped us to fulfill that. So I will speak a little bit about the Pomorje Agri-Food Data Lab. They have, but not the whole living lab. They have the business model developed in a frame on the project Lotus, where they're focused on precision farming for fertilization and spraying, and they developed a business model like for offering the farmers the smart farming services. In the collaborative business, as you can see here from the presentation, from the slide, Kmetsko-Gozdarska Zbornica Slovenia as a public advisory service offered the service, innovation technology cluster, and Thermodon SMEs are as a technical and IT support. That is what the Kmetijsko-Gozdarska Zbornica Slovenia is not able to offer. So since they're not have enough technical staff skills and knowledge, but their consumers are farmers and their customers are farmers, so they can get innovative services and they are just not offered by the Institute with them. As far for the business plan, for the financial sustainability, Pomorje Agri-Food Data Lab is still financed through mostly through the EU projects, mostly Horizon, and it's also public advisory services. ITC, it's only financed through the project activities. Farmers usually don't get financial payments except for EAP projects, but the long-term business plan is not yet made for the midterm. They have currently enough projects in the run so that the space services and economy might be the way to the more stable financial stability of the actors involved in their living lab. For the main participating actors, also farmers who are not beneficiaries in EU projects. So for involving them as participants, they must be quite creative and to offer them the benefit that motivates them to participate. Usually they offer them some kind of service, either free agroeconomic advice, like a production or investment plan, or give them access to the IT solutions and the development that helps them to make decisions about farming practice, tracking systems, machinery, or app services. Another important group are farm advisors. They offer them education and training, of course, on the new methodologies in agriculture. And also as far as how they involve stakeholders in co-creation activities when they are developing new IT solutions for farmers or farm advisors. They always include the users in the process in phase user testing, and also they include them later on. So that will be from my side now. Thank you very much. And I will now pass it back to my colleague, Delinda.
Yes, Thank you so much for this interesting example. So I will share the screen if if you stop sharing, I will continue by sharing the screen. Okay, so let me just continue with the presentation. Okay, so in this next section, I would like to present the many engagement and capacity building activities that Nashoons continue to roll out to support you further in the application process. The Nashoon partners have organized national engagement events. The first round is completed, but you can still watch the recording on the Nashoon's webpage. Fact sheet and e-learning material are now available to inform and train on topics of living labs, the open calls, the type of living labs in different land uses. So you can also access this information. Then we have recently launched an online help desk and an FAQ to support and answer to your questions. Webinars specifically on setting up, developing, and enlarging living labs have been organized. You can see the recording on the previous webinar on the Living Lab Essential on the Nashoon's website. These webinars will be also uploaded on the website, and the next webinar that is going to be held next Thursday will be also uploaded, so you can review the recording. Then a list of coaches and mentors can be found on the Nashoon webpage, and thematic webinars will be held on different themes for specific land uses. Finally, we have a matchmaking platform available to you to facilitate the creation of partnership. I would like to address a particular attention to the matchmaking platform because it is an incredible opportunity to create new partnership. So when you access the platform after registering, you should pay special attention to your profile and add all necessary information so that other participants can understand what your skills and interests are and identify whether there is room for collaboration. In the platform, you can search for collaboration and also offer your own skill and expertise in the marketplace. There is a section where you can search for companies and participants by filtering the information you're looking for. And you can also use the marketplace platforms to search for opportunities already published. So in addition to Nashoon's activities, I want to briefly mention a few more resources that will become available through the sister project Prep Soil. There are a couple of activities that will support living labs in speeding up their growth process. The first will be the design of a wider spectrum of business plans needed to upscaling of living labs and lighthouses in different soil use type and socioeconomic condition beyond the lifetime of the mission. The second will be the creation of a service package to accelerate the adoption, maturity, and optimize the running of the mission living labs and lighthouses under different land use contexts and supported by the model business plans. Keep an eye on the Prep Soil website and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates and on these activities. You may also contact us directly in case you need. And here we want to show you very briefly that we have already addressed some questions during the first webinar on how to set up the living lab, about the experimentation sites or the creation of partnership and about the soil aspects. So you can rewatch the webinar to see which questions have been addressed. And now we'll go through some of the questions that we have received for this specific webinar. So, okay, let's see which are the questions. So, for example, is 2030 the target in a required end year for the governance and business model of living labs? So the 2030 is a mild deadline for achieving the soil mission goals as for the implementation plan. Living labs are expected to continue their work and effort to support soil health, also in alignment with greater international commitments the EU joined, like the SDGs. And this is why the business planning, it is so important to allow the living lab to be self-sustainable and to continue afterwards. We have 2 farms under the university structure for the learning and training process. How we could be supported and involved in soil living lab activities. One of the criteria of the soil mission implementation plan is the real life setting. So the farms involved should be real farms that have products that, so not mock environment. Then to apply and to have more information on how to apply, besides checking the implementation plan and also the capacity building material provided by Nashun, like the webinars, the fact sheets, the thematic webinars that will be launched. You can get in touch with the mentors of your countries who can support you in defining your application. What type of stakeholders is better to include in the beginning? The power of the living lab is the quadruple helix. Not only one type of stakeholder should be involved because the living lab's value is the value proposition should be shared, must be shared by all the stakeholders of the quadruple helix. So this is a very important characteristic of the living lab. How to facilitate the cooperation between different stakeholders and assure their engagement. For example, the cooperation between industry and academia. The living lab is a catalyst, and ecosystem creates value for the ecosystem. A living lab should not impose the belief of one stakeholder, but the living lab should make sure to work in direction to all the stakeholders. It is necessary to find a value proposition that does not reflect one individual's overriding the interest. One individual specific interest. So it is necessary to find a common goal for all stakeholders. This ensures the willingness to cooperate and their commitment. So it is also important to mention that all the actors should be ready to change and to adapt the methodology according to the needs of their stakeholders. We have tackled this question before. Does the creation of a living lab necessarily imply that it is formally constituted as a legal constituted organization? So what we suggest it is important to make sure that the host organization is a legal entity. So it's important to understand who is behind the living lab. It is not mandatory that the living lab is legally constituted. As an example, we know a living lab that has been created under one organization as the university, and the same stakeholders are applying for a second living lab that will be constituted under the same university. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the governance model to favor the identification of real end user needs? The living lab is a source of open innovation. The governance can define how open your living lab is. In your governance model, you can have representatives of citizens, of government, etc., who can ensure the openness of the living lab and that the resources run smoothly. In your governance model, you should have a structure that incorporates and includes external contribution from experts, as for example, the Congress of, we can consider them as a Congress of the wise in a way. and this allows other important stakeholders to contribute and influence the decision of the Living Lab. Is there a governance structure that you recommend? There is no specific governance model recommended because in the presentation, we have shared some key steps and tools to create your governance model. Then the governance model to apply depends on the goal of the Living Labs, on the stakeholders you need to involve, and how the decisions are going to be taken, who is part of the operational team, and how the different stakeholders contribute. What we suggest that you need to make sure is that there are a group of experts, like an advisory board, that assure the scientific knowledge. And you need to have a governance model that is organized in a way that you know when stakeholders have to meet and when experts have to be consulted. What is the most important factor to set up a self-sustainable Living Lab? This funding supports the Living Lab in the early stages, but we need the Living Lab to reason at the meso level and not just the micro level. Otherwise, after the funding, after the funding, the activities of Living Lab stopped. After the funding, the activities of the Living Lab stopped. And based on the development of the governance model, you can then make sure that the Living Lab continue after this funding. So for this, you need to make sure that the stakeholders see the real interest. If you have a Living Lab that depends only on projects, the Living Lab will close after the projects. After the end of the projects. Therefore, you need to keep the interest of the stakeholders strong by creating trust. Trust with the ecosystem within the ecosystem is a crucial element that takes a lot of time to be built, but it's very easy to be destroyed. So you need to pay a lot of attention on this aspect. How to scale up? This is a tricky question. It's not easy to answer this question. So I would like to see if maybe if Dokimos is the chairperson of Enol, is here to support in answering this question.
Thank you, Dolinda. Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
How to scale up? Actually, the Living Labs, one of the strengths of the Living Labs is that they are very well connected with the local ecosystem. So as Dolinda explained before, they build trust with the local ecosystem. They know each other, they trust each other. So it's very easy for a Living Lab to vitalize the local ecosystem. But being part of an association of Living Labs like Enol, you can be in a world of Living Labs that trust each other cross-border or cross-nationally. So for instance, in the case of a Living Lab that works, that is very active in Greece, it can have the local ecosystem of Greece with trust, but then all the other Living Labs of Enol, for instance, they trust this Living Lab because the Enol or the association certifies that or creates the chain of trust for all the Living Labs. So we reach the point that a Living Lab can work with other Living Labs in different countries or in different continents. The objective of the associations in most of the associations like Enol most of the times is to harmonize the procedures and services. And this is the key for scaling up. If we manage to harmonize the procedures and services of all the members of an association, it means that the way an activity, a Living Lab activity is performed, is done in one Living Lab, the same way it is done in another Living Lab. So this allows the scaling up, because then you can imagine that an activity that runs in a Living Lab can run in many different Living Labs, so you can scale up. And this is what the certification actually does. Certifies that the Living Lab follows the harmonized procedures and services or has the same understanding of the procedures and services, which allows this scaling up. I know that it's more complex, but at least I gave the steps for scaling up.
Thank you so much. So let's see if there are maybe other questions that we have received now in the last part of the webinar that we can answer.
Thank you. Maybe I can jump in since thank you, Evdokimos, for joining us. And since there were a couple questions actually pertaining to Enol, maybe we can take advantage of you having joined us and turn these questions over to you, if that's okay. So we had one participant ask, is there a list of certified living labs using the certification procedure we have at Enol?
Yes, actually, there is a list. We keep an updated list online in our website and on all.org, so anyone can go there and search for a living lab, either by country or by thematic or by region. And we have also the catalog of our living labs, of our members, so anyone can have access to it. But it's our pleasure. You can contact Enol and ask for a specific living lab, like, can I find a living lab that works on this domain, has expertise in this domain? And also we have the working groups that know more details about living labs. So I, as an officer, would answer that we have, yes, 10 living labs in health. But if you ask for a specific, like I want a living lab in soil that has this and this and this criteria, then the office can help.
Thank you very much. So yes, don't hesitate to, we won't spend too much time in this webinar talking perhaps about the certification, because it's actually a lot of questions, which is great, about the certification process, but feel free to get in touch with us should you have any more questions about this. There was maybe one more that we can cover though, and let me just see if I can find it again. Perfect. So there was maybe one more question for you, Evdo, that asked, what would be your recommendations to improve the involvement of so many heterogeneous stakeholders with so many different interests coming from the quadruple helix? Would you have any specific recommendations?
I can say that this is the beauty, but this is also the challenge. It's really nice to have so many different people working for or actually being eager in order to create value, to be involved in the activities and create value. But at the same time, it's very challenging because you have to have high level, low level, lower level in terms of knowledge, let's say, that have to work together with equal terms. So I, as a living lab, what I do is that usually I ask advices from other living labs. So I try to learn from other living labs. We, as a living lab, have our own experiences, but also when we meet with other living labs, we try to understand and we try to evolve also our methods and procedures. Because the approach for engaging stakeholders or for applying living lab activities, it's not written in the stone. It means that it is continuously evolving, because the idea is to make it, to adapt to the stakeholders and not ask the stakeholders to adapt to our methodologies. So this is why we, during the opening like this, for instance, we see always new methodologies, new approaches, and then we try to get ideas to cherry pick ideas and to improve our methodologies.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see here. I believe we had a couple questions that would go to our Biosense colleagues. Maybe we can go to these two next. So we had a question. So as mentioned by Isidora in their living lab, I understand that the setting up is a long and not so easy way. And we may need to identify the first priority to have solid basis and then implement the other activities or organization processes. But this last things are designed by the first activities of the living lab. Would you have any comments on this, Isidora?
Yes, thank you, Isabel. Well, of course, since a living lab is a meeting point of different stakeholders, which need to be co-involved somehow, it is not an easy process, but it definitely requires a lot of creativity and new ideas, as I said during my presentation, which makes it also nice, and it brings a lot of benefits, especially when it comes to this validation and testing phase, because you actually get to gather the feedback from your potential users directly on the spot. And this is what I would say would be the best benefit for us when it comes to the living lab concept. So yeah, it's not easy, but it's worth it. And I would say that, yes, you can start by defining your first goal. So that is really important, not to spread a lot with the goals, but like define the first one, understand where you stand with what you want to do in the living lab. What is your main topic as an organization, as a living lab, and then evolve from there. So yes, set up a long-term goal, 1, maybe 2, depends on the situation. As I said, every living lab is a specific concept for itself, and there are some replications, but you need to understand your environment in order to set up the living lab. So yeah.
Thank you very much. We also had another question about, does the farms include greenhouses, or is it limited to open traditional agriculture in terms of?
Well, in our case, we only had open farms, but of course it's not forbidden. I think when it comes to the soil health component of the living lab, greenhouses are really also important to have, since the soil health would maybe change from greenhouse to open air farming. So I think when it comes to the soil, if we are speaking about soil health living labs, as the Neshuns project is talking about, I would definitely include the greenhouses. We didn't have, because for our type of technologies, there was no need, but definitely we would involve the greenhouses as well if needed in the future when it comes to different technology, maybe sensoring within greenhouses. So it's a definite plus if you have greenhouses, but we didn't have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we have time for just maybe a couple more questions. Let's see here. We have a question on, can we work on farming soils and city soils? You have mentioned that in the project you can have more than one land uses. That is correct. Yes. So the as part of the applications to the different living lab topics under the soil mission open calls, yes, your application can cover more than one land use. So if your area of work or your living labs are a bit cross-cutting and they cover, say, forestry and urban land uses, you are still able to participate in the call for projects with that. So absolutely, we encourage you to do so. Let's see what else here. So yes, we have had lots of questions about the availability of the canvas. So yes, we'll be sharing the slides after this webinar. So both the recording and the slides will be shared on the Neshuns website. So stay tuned. We'll be sending out an email to everyone once that's ready. So keep an eye on your emails, and you will get that link so that you're able to access those materials. Let's see here, perhaps just one more. Or actually, let's see. Okay, maybe this one, and then we'll conclude here. Is it feasible for living labs at startup stage to have a private funding model? So i.e. outside of EU national funding, or is it more typical or feasible to set up with public funding and later progress to a sustainable model based on private stakeholder contributions? I'm maybe opening it up to both of you, Evdo and Isidora, to comment.
Isidora, you want to go first?
Please, Evdo, you can go first.
Okay. Okay, then I think that we should always have in mind the business plan, even from the beginning. If it's not that feasible, if it's not that stable or that detailed, we should have a vision of where our business plan would like to be. Of course, in the beginning, since most of the living labs have to do with science, or they come from academia, they start from academia. Of course, the public funding is this that puts the fuel in the living lab in order to set up the living lab and to grow up a little bit, in order to be mature and to have a mature business plan that would make it self-sustainable and not project-based.
Yes, I would say that it is really beneficial to have such a plan, if I understood correctly. However, as a document said, most of the living labs start from the academia, so this would be the most, how can I say, most frequent way of financing the European projects, also for us. But if there's opportunities like private funding and different, that's also really good for the living lab to continue its life cycle.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you both. And we've received a ton of questions. So thank you everyone for submitting your questions through the Q&A box. You can still do so, because what we'll do is that we'll compile the questions, and after the series of webinars ends, we will be taking some time to respond to your questions, and we'll make them available. So there's still an opportunity for you to submit your questions right here through the Q&A box. But since we only have a few more minutes left in this webinar, let us go into the conclusion here. So I'll just reshare my screen, which should come through momentarily. Perfect. Wonderful. So yes, in conclusion, here's just a brief reminder about the 2 Living Lab topics of the 2023 open call titled Research, Innovation, and Other Actions to Support the Implementation of Mission A Soil Deal for Europe. So a reminder that you have 2 topics open to Living Labs. Topic 08 on co-creating solutions for soil health in living labs, and topic 09, which is focused on carbon farming in living labs. The deadline for submission of applications within this work program for both topics is September 20th of this year at 5 p.m. Brussels time. And a reminder that the full proposal must be submitted at once by the deadline, and it has to be submitted electronically via the Funder and Tenders portal. And the application should include 4 to 5 or more living labs that address the same or several land use types in at least 3 different member states and or associated countries. And finally, our call to action from today's webinar. So yes, connect with one another. So Delinda has already mentioned the matchmaking tool. We will also have those upcoming thematic events that will provide fantastic opportunities for you to connect with one another, have more in-depth conversations about the soil mission objectives or challenges for the creation of proposals for the soil mission open call topics on living labs. We also, in addition to the Q&A box for today, we have, of course, the help desk. So should you have any more questions following up today's event, reach out to us through the help desk and ask your questions, and we'll provide some answers through that venue. And a reminder that we have our next webinar, the last of this year's series, that is taking place next Thursday, so a week from now, that will be focusing on the core elements and specificities of the Living Lab topic. So this is where any questions that you might have about this will be covered in greater detail, and we will have representatives from the European Commission joining us to present. So definitely join us for this. You're able to register online through the Nashun's website. And with that, thank you so very much for joining today's session. Thank you to my colleagues who spoke today, Isidora, Vladislava, Delinda. Thank you to our special speaker, surprise speaker, Evdokimos, for joining us as well. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Let's stay in touch. Get in touch if you have any questions, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.